Hi, I'm Nora. I live here in Austin. It's a city I love, full of life and possibility, a place where I've built a quiet existence for myself. But for a long time, a shadow from my past, from my family, followed me here, even across state lines. It's a story about expectation and sacrifice, about being invisible to the people who were supposed to see you most clearly, and about what happens when the scales finally tip. Maybe you felt it too. That pressure to be the good one, the quiet one, the one who fixes things or smooths things over. The one everyone relies on, but somehow never really sees. My family, well, they were good at not seeing me. Not the real me anyway. They saw the role I played, the part one was cast in from childhood, the responsible older sister, the dependable daughter. The one who wouldn't cause a fuss. There was always my sister, Clara. She was the bright star, the one who needed all the attention, all the resources, all the praise. Everything revolved around Clara, her needs, her dreams, her delicate feelings. And I was the steady ground, the one who never needed much, who could handle things. Or so they told themselves. The story I'm going to share with you happened over a few years, really culminating in a moment that changed everything. It involves a family business, a restaurant my parents poured their lives into, and a significant investment I made that they, and my sister, chose to conveniently forget. Or perhaps, worse, they remembered and just didn't care. It's about sitting across a table from the people you love, the people you've sacrificed for, and hearing them talk about you like you're nothing. Like you're less than nothing. Like you're a problem, or an inconvenience, or just disappointing. And all the while, you know something they pretend not to know, something that fundamentally undercuts their entire performance. It's heavy, I know. It was heavy to live through. But staying quiet was heavier. Carrying that secret, that hurt, that injustice, it weighed more than any confrontation ever could. So, if you've ever felt unseen, undervalued, or betrayed by the ones you love, stick around. Maybe there's something in my story that will resonate with yours. It all started, I suppose, with the restaurant itself. My parents had opened the Daily Bread, a quaint little cafe, years ago, long before I moved to Austin. It was their dream, a place filled with the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods. For years, it chugged along, doing okay, but never quite thriving. It needed a boost, a breath of fresh air, and, crucially, capital they simply didn't have. They'd call me periodically, mostly to complain about their finances or to ask about Clara. Clara was living closer to them, pursuing her artistic dreams, which required, naturally, considerable financial support from my parents. My calls would consist of listening to their worries about the cafe, their frustrations with Clara's latest expensive hobby, and then a hurried goodbye as they had to rush off to deal with something or other. My life in Austin, my job, my achievements, they were usually glossed over or met with a polite but detached interest. I worked hard. I'd always been good with numbers, detail-oriented, reliable. After college, I landed a solid job in tech here in Austin. It paid well, and I was diligent with my savings. While Clara was exploring interpretive dance and needing money for essential art supplies, I was building a quiet financial stability. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Then came the call. It was Mom, her voice thin with stress. The cafe was struggling. They needed to expand, maybe add dinner service, renovate the aging interior, upgrade the equipment. They needed a significant chunk of money, more than the bank was willing to lend them without substantial collateral they didn't possess. They'd tried everything, she said, sounding desperate. They didn't ask me directly for money at first. Not in so many words. They just painted a picture of impending failure, of their life's work crumbling. There were tears. There were mentions of how hard they'd worked, how much they'd sacrificed, never mentioning my own smaller sacrifices along the way. It was a soft ask, cloaked in despair. I felt that familiar tug, that ingrained need to fix things, to help, to be the dependable one. My parents weren't savvy business people. They were dreamers who loved their community, but struggled with the practicalities of running a growing enterprise. The thought of their dream dying was genuinely painful to me. And buried deep down, there was still that hopeful flicker. Maybe, just maybe, if I did this, if I saved them, they would finally see me. See my capability, my generosity, my worth. I had saved a considerable amount. Enough for a down payment on a small house, enough for a comfortable cushion. It represented years of diligent saving, saying no to trips, driving an older car, living frugally. It was my security blanket, my key to independence. I talked to them again. I asked questions about their business plan, their projections, their needs. They had some ideas, but they were vague. What they needed was concrete capital. I didn't offer immediately. I mulled it over for weeks. It was a huge risk, not just financially, but emotionally. What if it failed? What if they still didn't appreciate it? What if it just became another thing they took for granted? But the tug was too strong. The need to help, the desire for their approval, the fear of their failure, it all bundled together into a heavy weight in my chest. I decided to do it. All of it. A substantial sum that would cover the renovations, the new equipment, and provide a buffer for the first year of expanded operations. It was almost my entire savings. I called them back. I remember the conversation clearly. I laid out my offer, explaining the amount, the fact that it was my savings, earned through years of work. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by an outpouring of tearful gratitude. "Oh, Nora, our wonderful Nora," my mother cried. "You're saving us. We don't know how we can ever repay you." My father was equally effusive. They promised to make me a partner, to include me in decisions, to recognize my contribution officially. They talked about structuring it as a loan, but with flexible terms, understanding it was my savings. They were so grateful, so full of promises in that moment. It felt good, genuinely good, to be able to help them in such a significant way. For a little while, that hopeful flicker felt like it might ignite into a steady flame. I transferred the money. It was a strangely clinical act, seeing the number disappear from my account balance and reappear in theirs. A lifetime of saving, gone in a few clicks. But it was for family, for their dream, and maybe, just maybe, for a change in our dynamic. The renovation happened quickly. My parents sent me pictures, excitedly detailing the new layout, the modern kitchen, the expanded seating area. They talked about the buzz in the town, the anticipation. They launched the dinner service, and it was, by all accounts, a success. New customers came in, old customers returned, and the cafe finally seemed to be flourishing. During this time, my calls with them shifted slightly. They were happier, less stressed. The complaints about Clara lessened slightly, though never disappeared entirely. Some things were constants. They'd mention the restaurant, its success, the hard work they were putting in. But the promises? The talk of partnership, of official recognition, of including me in decisions? That faded quickly. When I asked about the loan agreement, my father became vague. "Oh, yes, we'll get to that, Nora. So much paperwork with the expansion. You know," my mother would chime in, "we appreciate you, dear, you know that. We're family, it's all family money, isn't it?" The family money phrase sent a chill down my spine. It was my money, earned through my solitary effort, not some pooled family resource I was dipping into. I tried to push gently a few times, asking about the business structure, wanting to understand how my significant contribution was being recorded. Each time I was met with subtle deflection, busy excuses, or a touch of injured innocence. "Don't you trust us, Nora?" my mother would say, making me feel instantly guilty for even asking. After everything, I backed off. The success of the restaurant seemed genuine, and I told myself they were just busy. That they would get around to it. That their gratitude was real, even if unspoken now. That flicker of hope dimmed again, but it wasn't entirely extinguished. I wanted to believe in them. I needed to. Life went on. I continued working in Austin. I started dating someone new, a kind, steady person who seemed to genuinely see and appreciate me. My life was moving forward, building away from the gravitational pull of my family's dynamics. But the cord wasn't cut. There were still the calls, the occasional visits, the attempts to maintain a connection. During these visits, the conversation was almost entirely dominated by the restaurant. Its success, the long hours my parents worked, the praise they received. Clara would sometimes be there, full of anecdotes about her latest artistic endeavor, often requiring a new infusion of parental funds, which were now, ironically, flowing more freely thanks to my investment. Neither my parents nor Clara ever mentioned my contribution. Not a word. It was as if the expansion had happened through some magical intervention, or perhaps purely through their own renewed efforts. They spoke of their hard work, their vision, their risk. I would sit there, smiling, nodding, a knot tightening in my stomach. It was surreal, like being present at a play where everyone was discussing a major plot point, but using euphemisms that excluded the central truth. I felt invisible. Not just unseen, but actively rendered invisible. My sacrifice, my years of careful saving, my belief in them, it was all erased from the narrative. They talked at me about the restaurant, never to me about my role in it. My sister, basking in the reflected glory of their success and benefiting from its improved finances, treated me with the same casual dismissal she always had. "Oh, Nora. Still in tech?" she'd say, a hint of pity in her voice. "Must be dreadfully dull. You should come visit the cafe sometime. It's just buzzing now. So much more vibrant then." Well, then whatever you do, she never meant it maliciously. Not exactly. Just with an utter lack of consideration, a complete self-absorption that had been nurtured her entire life. She had no idea that the buzz she spoke of was built on my financial bedrock. My parents would complain about small things, petty annoyances at the restaurant, or the cost of new supplies. I'd listen, biting back the words, "That's my money you're talking about." I was afraid. Afraid of disrupting the fragile peace, afraid of their reaction, afraid of confirming that my sacrifice hadn't changed anything. The fear of being the difficult one, the one who made things uncomfortable, kept me silent. It was a role I was expertly trained for. The emotional toll was immense. I felt a constant dull ache of betrayal. It wasn't just the money, though that was a significant practical concern I tried to ignore. It was the principle. The complete lack of acknowledgement. The way they could look me in the eye, talk about the success I funded, and treat me like an afterthought, a background character in their lives. I started withdrawing. I'd shorten phone calls. I'd find excuses not to visit as often. My relationship with my family became a source of deep anxiety and sadness. My partner noticed. He was the first person outside of this dynamic who saw the strain it put on me. He'd listen patiently as I'd recount conversations, the disbelief plain on his face. "They don't mention it?" "Ever?" he'd ask, genuinely bewildered. "No," I'd confirm, "never." It started to feel less like an oversight and more like a deliberate act. A collective decision to erase my contribution, perhaps because acknowledging it would shift the family dynamic in a way they weren't comfortable with. It would give me leverage, a voice, a visible worth that challenged the established hierarchy. They needed me to stay in my box, the reliable, quiet support system, not an actual investor who deserved recognition and a say. The moment that finally broke me, the moment that became the catalyst for change, happened during a family dinner at the expanded restaurant. My parents had asked me to come visit for a special family meal to celebrate the cafe's 1-year anniversary since the expansion. I flew in, feeling a mix of obligation and faint hope that maybe, just maybe, this would be the occasion where they'd finally say something. A toast, a quiet word of thanks, anything. The restaurant was packed, lively, everything they had dreamed of. It looked wonderful. I felt a pang of pride, quickly followed by the familiar bitterness. We were seated at a large table. My parents, Clara, her latest boyfriend, and me. The conversation, predictably, revolved around the cafe. My father was regaling Clara's boyfriend with the story of the expansion. It was touch and go for a while, he boomed, gesturing grandly. We knew we needed to expand, to take it to the next level, but the funds just weren't there. We scraped together every penny we had, worked extra hours, took out small loans. It was a real struggle. But we believed in it, and somehow, we made it happen. "Yes," my mother chimed in, beaming. "It took sheer grit and determination. We sacrificed so much, went without so we could make this dream a reality. Clara nodded, looking impressed. It's amazing, Dad. All your hard work paid off. I sat there frozen, the food on my plate going cold. Scraped together every penny? Took out small loans? Sheer grit and determination? My hundreds of thousands of dollars, my years of careful saving, reduced to, somehow, we made it happen and small loans? It was a rewriting of history so blatant, so utterly dismissive of my reality, that it stole my breath. They weren't just forgetting anymore. They were actively constructing a false narrative that completely excluded me. It wasn't an oversight, it was a choice. A choice to erase my contribution, to keep the story focused solely on their struggle, their triumph. Because acknowledging my part would mean acknowledging my power, my sacrifice, my worth. And they didn't want to do that. My mother turned to me then, a casual, almost pitying look in her eyes. "Nora, dear," she said, her voice dropping slightly, "it's a shame you're so far away. And that your job is, well, not quite as exciting as running a popular spot like this. But at least you're stable, I suppose. Not everyone is cut out for taking risks, are they? Not cut out for taking risks? Me? Who had just risked almost every penny I owned to save their business. The hypocrisy, the sheer audacity of it, landed like a physical blow. It wasn't just that they ignored my contribution. They were actively portraying me as someone who played it safe, who lacked the courage they supposedly possessed. The air felt thick, suffocating. My heart pounded in my ears. My hands trembled slightly in my lap. For years, I had swallowed their dismissiveness, their favoritism towards Clara, their subtle expectations that I would always be the responsible, quiet one who needed nothing. I had absorbed their narrative of my own life, accepting my role as the supporting character. But this was too much. It was a deliberate erasure of my reality, coupled with a patronizing judgment of my character, delivered in the very place my sacrifice had built. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A hot, unfamiliar spark of indignation. My father continued talking, oblivious, describing future plans for the cafe, future expansions. He mentioned needing more capital down the line, laughing about how they'd have to find it somewhere. It was a casual joke, but to me, it sounded like a preview of coming attractions. Were they planning to come back to me again after dismissing my last contribution so completely? I looked at their faces. My father, puffing up with pride. My mother, smiling indulgently at Clara. Clara, utterly self-involved, not sparing me a glance. None of them saw me. They saw the role I played, the convenient relative, the silent supporter. They did not see the woman who had worked tirelessly, saved diligently, and then risked everything for them. The spark ignited into a flame. A quiet, steady heat spread through my chest, burning away the fear and the desperate need for their approval that had held me captive for so long. I saw them clearly in that moment, stripped bare of the idealized image I had clung to. They weren't just oblivious. They were actively, perhaps even consciously, exploitative. They wanted the benefits of my generosity without the inconvenience of acknowledging my agency or my worth. I took a deep breath. My voice, when it came, was quiet but steady. It cut through my father's monologue like a knife. "It's funny," I said, looking directly at my father. My mother and Clara turned to me, surprised by my interruption. Clara's boyfriend looked politely confused. "Funny?" my father prompted, a slight edge to his voice. "Yes," I continued, my gaze unwavering. "Hearing you talk about how you somehow made the expansion happen. How you scraped together every penny and took out small loans." My mother's smile faltered. "Nora, dear, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the several $100,000 I transferred to you last year," I said, my voice gaining strength. "My entire life savings, earned over 10 years of hard work, which I gave you to fund this expansion. The money you promised to structure as a loan, the contribution you promised to recognize." Silence descended on the table, heavy and suffocating. The lively restaurant noise seemed to fade into the background. My parents stared at me, their faces draining of color. Clara looked utterly bewildered, then annoyed. Nora, my mother gasped, her voice hushed with what I initially thought was shame, but quickly recognized as annoyance. Not now. We're having a lovely family dinner. A lovely family dinner where you're telling everyone how you built this, I responded, keeping my voice calm despite the tremor in my hands, while conveniently omitting the part where I essentially financed it. My father cleared his throat. Now, Nora, we appreciate what you did, you know that. We really do. But it's family money, like your mother said. We don't need to make a big song and dance about it. It's not a formal business arrangement, it's family helping family. Family helping family? I repeated, the phrase tasting like ash in my mouth. Is that what you call taking my entire savings, erasing my contribution, and then telling me I'm not cut out for taking risks? While sitting in the restaurant my risk paid for. Don't be dramatic, Nora, Clara interjected, finally finding her voice. She sounded impatient. You had savings, you helped out. Great. We're family. That's what families do. Is it, Clara? I turned to her. Would you give Mom and Dad your entire savings if they asked? Would you work for 10 years, save every penny, and hand it over with no expectation of acknowledgement or repayment? Clara looked flustered. That's different. I don't have that kind of money. And I'm pursuing my art. Exactly, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. It's different for you. It's always been different for you. You're the one who takes, I'm the one who gives. And when I give something significant, something life-changing, it's not even worth mentioning. My mother leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. Nora, you are being incredibly disrespectful. We have done everything for you. Given you a good home, an education. And I'm grateful for that, I cut in, unwilling to be sidetracked by the familiar guilt trip. But that doesn't give you the right to take advantage of me now. To treat me with such casual disregard. You didn't just forget about the money. You pretended it never happened. You built a story where I wasn't the savior, wasn't the risk-taker, wasn't even present. You wrote me out. My father's face was red. You're making this uncomfortable, Nora. We are incredibly busy people. We work hard. We don't have time for this kind of accusation. It's not an accusation, Dad, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. It's the truth. And I can't pretend anymore that it's okay. I can't sit here and listen to you take credit for something I sacrificed so much for, while you talk about me like I'm irrelevant. Your family, my mother cried, her voice rising. We don't talk about money like this in family. Maybe that's the problem, I said softly. Maybe if we talked about money and about sacrifice and about fairness, we wouldn't be here right now. But you didn't want to talk about it. You wanted to take it and pretend it didn't exist. Just like you've pretended I didn't exist in the ways that mattered for years. Clara finally spoke, her voice dripping with disdain. Honestly, Nora, making a scene like this in the restaurant, it's mortifying. Just because you're jealous of Mom and Dad's success. Jealous. I laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Clara, their success in expanding this place is literally my money. I am not jealous of their success. I am furious about their dishonesty and their disrespect. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. That is enough, Nora. We will not have this discussion here. You are out of line. Yes, I agreed, standing up slowly. I am out of line. Out of the line you drew for me. The line where I was supposed to be silent, compliant, and invisible. Well, I'm stepping out of it. I can't do this anymore. I looked at each of them in turn. My father, angry and entitled. My mother, wounded and manipulative. Clara, dismissive and self-absorbed. These were the people I had bent over backwards for, sacrificed for, longed to be seen by. And in this moment of truth, they hadn't risen to meet me. They had doubled down on their dysfunction. I paid for this expansion, I stated, my voice clear and strong, loud enough that heads turned at nearby tables. Every single penny of the renovation, the new equipment, the initial operating costs. My parents promised recognition, inclusion, and a repayment plan. They delivered none of it. Instead, they erased my contribution and continued to treat me with casual contempt. I picked up my small purse. I can't be part of this dynamic anymore. I can't keep pretending. I hope you enjoy the restaurant. I hope it continues to thrive. But I want nothing more to do with the business or with being treated this way. Where do you think you're going? My mother demanded, half rising from her seat. I'm going back to Austin, I said. Back to my life, where I am seen and valued for who I am. I won't be visiting again for a while. Maybe not ever. I'll be in touch about a formal repayment plan for the investment. Since it's clearly not family money when it comes to acknowledging it, then it's a business transaction, and it needs to be treated as such. You can't do that, my father exclaimed. I just did, I said, a sense of calm settling over me now that the words were out. The fear hadn't vanished completely, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of liberation. I had spoken my truth, claimed my reality, and set a boundary that felt like a solid wall being built around my fragile self-worth. I hope you figure things out, I said, my voice softer now, tinged with a sadness for the family I wished I had. But I won't be waiting around while you do. I turned and walked away from the table, away from their shocked faces and the buzzing restaurant that was a monument to my unseen labor. My legs felt a little shaky, but my steps were firm. I walked out of the restaurant, out into the night air, and didn't look back. The immediate aftermath was difficult. There were angry texts and voicemails from my parents, full of accusations, guilt-tripping, and denial. They accused me of trying to ruin their celebration, of being selfish, of not understanding family. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of my feelings or my sacrifice, only outrage that I had dared to speak up and disrupt their narrative. Clara sent me a few curt messages, telling me I'd embarrassed everyone and asking me to just drop it. It was clear she hadn't grasped the magnitude of what I was feeling or the depth of the betrayal. Or maybe she had, and simply didn't care, as long as her comfortable world wasn't disturbed. I didn't engage with the accusations. I responded calmly, reiterating that I needed space and that we would need to discuss the financial matter formally. I contacted a lawyer, a business attorney, to draft a repayment agreement based on my original investment. It felt cold and clinical, completely contrary to the family narrative they clung to, but it was necessary. If my contribution wasn't family, then it was business. My parents initially resisted. They dragged their feet, claiming they couldn't afford it, that I was being cruel. My father tried to negotiate, offering ridiculously small installments over an impossible time frame. My mother tried the emotional appeals again. But I held firm. My lawyer advised me on the strength of my case, the documentation of the money transfer, their initial promises, even if informal. It was a draining process, stretching over several months. It solidified the rift between us. The family they idealized couldn't withstand the reality of fairness and accountability. They saw my boundaries not as self-preservation, but as an attack. During this time, I leaned heavily on my partner and a few close friends. They offered support, validation, and a much-needed external perspective. They reminded me that my feelings were valid, that I had been exploited, and that setting boundaries, even painful ones, was an act of self-respect. My partner was particularly wonderful, patiently listening to my fears and doubts, celebrating small victories, and just being a steady presence. I also started therapy. I needed help processing years of ingrained family dynamics, of people-pleasing and self-silencing. I needed to understand why I had allowed myself to be treated that way for so long, and how to build a future where I wouldn't repeat those patterns. Therapy was challenging, bringing up painful memories and forcing me to confront uncomfortable truths about my family and myself. But it was also incredibly healing. I learned about the concept of the identified patient in dysfunctional family systems, often the person who tries to fix everything or speaks up, becoming the perceived problem when they disrupt the status quo. I learned about the golden child, Clara, and the scapegoat or lost child, often me. Understanding these dynamics helped me see that their behavior wasn't a reflection of my worth, but a product of their own issues and the roles we had all been assigned. The financial agreement was eventually reached, mostly because my lawyer made it clear that pursuing it legally would be more costly and damaging for them than agreeing to a reasonable repayment plan. It wasn't as fast as I might have liked, spread out over a few years, but it was formal. It acknowledged the debt. It validated that it wasn't family money to be taken for granted, But my money, a legitimate investment they were obligated to repay. The relationship with my parents and Clara became minimal. Text messages were brief and infrequent, mostly logistical. Phone calls stopped. I missed the idea of having a close family, the comforting fantasy I had held onto for so long. There was grief for the relationship I wished we had, the one that existed only in my imagination. But that grief was mixed with a sense of peace. The constant anxiety, the knot in my stomach, the feeling of being perpetually misunderstood and undervalued, that began to fade. I focused on my life in Austin. My job, my relationship, my friends, my own interests. I started putting the energy I had spent on trying to please my family into nurturing myself. I took up pottery, something I'd always wanted to try. I spent weekends hiking with my partner. I built traditions with my chosen family of friends. Getting the first few repayment checks from my parents felt strange. A small validation, a concrete symbol of the shift. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about the acknowledgement, however grudgingly given. The last time I saw my family was brief and somewhat awkward at a distant relative's wedding. We exchanged polite nods, minimal conversation. They looked older, tired. The restaurant was still doing well, I heard. They didn't mention it to me. I didn't ask. There was a distance between us now, not just geographical, but emotional. The chasm created by years of unspoken resentments and culminating in that moment at the restaurant. I realized that day that I wasn't angry anymore. There was still sadness, a residue of the hurt, but the burning anger had subsided. It had been replaced by a quiet certainty. I had done the right thing, the necessary thing, for myself. I had honored my own worth, even when the people closest to me hadn't. My relationship with money changed too. It wasn't just a tool for saving or a resource to be potentially given away. It was a symbol of my effort, my skill, my independence. I managed my finances with a renewed sense of purpose, building security for my future on my terms. Reclaiming my voice felt like coming home to myself after a long exile. I no longer censored my opinions or downplayed my achievements to avoid rocking the boat. I spoke my mind, kindly but firmly. I set boundaries in other areas of my life too, recognizing that the patterns of allowing others to take advantage of my good nature weren't limited to my family. It was a hard journey, marked by tears, doubt, and moments of profound loneliness. There were times I questioned if speaking up had been worth the cost, the rupture in the family. But every time that doubt crept in, I remembered sitting at that table, feeling erased and dismissed, and I knew I couldn't go back to being that person. The cost of silence had been my self-respect. The peace I found on the other side wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, internal. It was the absence of the constant need to perform, to please, to be smaller than I was. It was the freedom to simply be Nora, seen and accepted by the people who chose to see me, and most importantly, seen and accepted by myself. Looking back, that dinner at the restaurant was the pivot point. The moment where the years of quiet pain converged into a single, undeniable truth. And speaking that truth, however terrifying, was the first step on the path to reclaiming myself. It wasn't just about the money, it was about owning my story, my value, my right to exist fully and visibly. And little did they know, when they sat there talking about their grit and determination, when they subtly put me down, that the very ground beneath them, the successful expansion they were celebrating, was a testament to my grit, my determination, and my faith. A faith they ultimately didn't deserve, but which ironically paved the way for my own liberation. So, that's my story. A story about family, money, betrayal, and finally, finding my voice. It wasn't easy, and the scars are still there, but they serve as reminders of how far I've come. From the quiet, compliant daughter to a woman who stands confidently in her own truth. I'm still Nora from Austin. But I'm not the same Nora who sat at that dinner table feeling invisible. I'm stronger, clearer, and finally, truly seen. And I hope, maybe, if you're in a similar situation, reading this helps you feel a little less alone. That it plants a seed of possibility, that change is possible, even when it feels impossible. Thank you for letting me share this with you. It means a lot to finally say it out loud without the weight of their expectations or judgments. If any part of my story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar with family or loved ones, please let me know in the comments below. It helps to know we're not alone in these struggles. And if you felt a connection to my story and want to hear more about navigating complex relationships and finding your voice, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. It really helps me to keep sharing these experiences. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how others see you or by what they take from you. It comes from within. And sometimes you have to be the one to see it, claim it, and protect it fiercely. You're seen. You are valued. And you are not alone. Take care of yourselves. Thank you for listening.